In the Ace Attorney series, prosecuting attorneys and defense attorneys practice their jobs for a variety of reasons. These attorneys have different relationships with what they consider to be justice, to the truth, and ultimately the legal system as a whole. While court proceedings, as presented in the series, may be unrealistic and wacky even compared to those in real life, characters struggle all the same through the various games to come to terms with why they stand in court. Growth and change of the various main characters can be seen throughout the various games as the stories woven in each builds on what came before. I want to analyze in this video how Ace Attorney represented the law-related concepts and the moral dilemmas on the merits of its own story, through without involving comparisons to law systems as found in the real world, as this is often done with the Ace Attorney games. To ultimately find how this series tackles and deals with these concepts in its story and arcs of the main characters. The following video contains major spoilers for the entire Ace Attorney series, except the two The Great Ace Attorney games and Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. For the sake of context, some insight is needed in the peculiarities of the court system of Ace Attorney. In the world of the series, the initial trial system is in place. This dictates that criminal trials have to be wrapped up in 3 days or less, due to the amount of crime clogging up the system. This was introduced a few years before 2016, the year in which Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney takes place. Before this, proceedings could last from months to years, as discussed in Turnabout Legacy of Ace Attorney Investigations 2, Prosecutor's Gambit. However, outside of this, trials have always been held more or less the same way across different countries and times. This can be seen in the Great Ace Attorney duology, games that are set in the late 1800s, and where courtroom proceedings are more or less the same as they are in the modern day of the series. They are also the same in the United Kingdom and Japan in the 1800s, albeit the United Kingdom has a jury system. At present, we can also see that the legal system of the Kingdom of Khura'in used to be similar to that of America, the setting of the main series in the English localization, before the introduction of the Defense Culpability Act, which saw the effective eradication of defense attorneys in that kingdom. When it comes to the actual proceedings themselves, in general, the prosecutor's office has close ties with the police department, and prosecutors are in charge of investigations. They hold on to evidence found during investigations at the prosecutor's office, and after a trial is finished, the evidence is transferred to the police department. Defense attorneys are officially not permitted to investigate crime scenes and have to worm their way around that to do so anyways. Police officers that permit this can get in trouble if done so. The lawyers seen in the series are also of private firms, employed specifically by their clients to defend them in court. Evidence brought up during a trial only has to abide by one of two criteria. Either it has to be approved by the police department before the trial, or unregistered evidence brought up during a trial has to be relevant to the case. These rules are fairly loose, and throughout the games it is a common occurrence that both the defense and the prosecution bring up evidence in a trial that the other party was unaware of beforehand to strengthen their case. Things brought up without evidence are usually dismissed without evidence. Prosecutors may also call witnesses for their testimony, which the defense has a right to cross-examine. The defense can also summon witnesses, but this is considered highly unusual. To ultimately gain a conviction, decisive evidence or a confession from the suspect is needed. Lastly, to ensure that the defense and prosecutorial attorneys stay honest, there are regulatory panels that have the authority to punish these attorneys. In the worst case, they may relieve attorneys of their badges and thus their license to practice law. For defense attorneys, there is the Bar Association, which is presumably made up of defense attorneys. For prosecutors, there is the Committee for Prosecutorial Excellence, comprised of people from both legal and political professions. This committee also has authority over police officers, and both panels have ties with each other. What drives prosecutors to stand in court? This changes for prosecutor Miles Edgeworth throughout the first 3 Ace Attorney games. As a boy, he wanted to become a defense attorney like his father, Gregory Edgeworth. However, this changed after his father was murdered in the DL6 incident. In that incident, Miles, his father, and court bailiff Yanni Yogi were trapped in an elevator in the district court due to an earthquake after the end of one of Gregory's trials. They all began to lose consciousness after being trapped in the elevator for 5 hours, and when they came to, it was found Gregory had been murdered. Yanni Yogi was arrested for the murder but was found innocent. All people involved had lost their memories of the events because of oxygen deprivation. leading to Yogi not being sound of mind, and so he was found innocent due to lack of evidence. Due to this turn of events, Miles's view of defense attorneys began to change. While he had idolized his father and wanted to walk in his footsteps previously, now he saw how the attorney Robert Hammond helped the only man who conceivably could have killed his father get off the hook. Miles began to resent attorneys as a result, and Yogi resented Hammond as well. Due to the temporary insanity plea, he was socially ruined, and his fiancée committed suicide. According to Marvin Grossberg, Hammond's boss, he was a skilled attorney, but he only believed in that skill. He went against the creed that Gregory had believed in, that a defense attorney should be a friend to the friendless and believe in their clients. Hammond did not trust in his clients and only defended them for his own sake, not theirs. So he only won Yogi's verdict for himself. Hammond's flawed defense methods caused the truth of the DL6 incident to be lost, starting Miles down the prosecutor's path. He became a student of Manfred von Karma, a prosecutor who had never lost a single case for 25 years at that point. Von Karma is a perfectionist in all things, and his reason to stand in court is very simple: to seek guilty verdicts for every defendant brought before him, stopping at nothing to maintain a perfect win record. These values were instilled in Miles Edgeworth, who started to study to become a prosecutor. Aside from wanting to maintain a perfect win record, Edgeworth's initial reasons to stand in court are also a bit more nuanced. He believes that one can never be sure about whether or not a defendant is innocent or not. As such, the only thing Edgeworth is ultimately able to do is make sure every defendant is declared guilty. If innocent people are found guilty by him or von Karma, so be it. To ensure that every defendant is indeed found guilty, Edgeworth and von Karma employ various dirty tactics. They tamper with evidence and make deals with witnesses so they will not mention an inconvenient testimony. It can be seen during the events of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. In Turnabout Sisters, Edgeworth requests a second autopsy be done on the murder victim. He only brings this up in court when the defense points out a contradiction in a witness's testimony, to make this contradiction disappear and make the defense look foolish. Later, in that same case, witness Red White says that he was instructed, likely by Edgeworth, not to mention a light stand that would place him at the scene of the crime. Similarly, in Turnabout Goodbyes, von Karma arranges it so Detective Gumshoe and the witness Lotta Hart give very vague testimony so the defense cannot easily poke holes in them. He even tries to ensure that the defense cannot cross-examine certain testimonies at all. However, during the events of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, things begin to change for Edgeworth. Turnabout Sisters, he tastes defeat for the first time as Phoenix wins a not guilty verdict for himself. Due to this, Edgeworth feels like he has lost everything, and becomes saddled with, in his words, unnecessary feelings, uncertainty and unease about his philosophy. Due to this unease, he begins to act strangely during Turnabout Samurai. When the cross-examination of the witness D. Vasquez is about to end and defendant Will Powers is about to be found guilty, Edgeworth objects and requests more testimony. This eventually leads to the discovery that Vasquez committed the murder and not Powers, something Edgeworth later describes as only natural. Change begins to form within Edgeworth, but it is not cemented until the events of Turnabout Goodbyes and Rise from the Ashes. In the former case, Edgeworth is framed for the murder of Robert Hammond by Jan Yogi and Manfred von Karma. It is his turn to sit in the defendant's chair, but he is ultimately saved by Phoenix, who also proves that von Karma was behind both that murder and the DL6 incident. He is thus saved by the type of person he had grown to hate, the defense attorney. During Rise from the Ashes, Edgeworth makes several professional mistakes in his handling of the investigation of the murder of a detective. His investigation overlooks a scarf wherein a switchblade knife is hidden. He shoos away a police officer who comes to deliver a report about a related murder because he needs to focus on the trial the next day. Edgeworth has to come before an inquiry committee due to this, under suspicions of deliberately concealing evidence, though in the end they decide it was due to a communication error. Later in the case, it is revealed that Edgeworth unknowingly presented forged evidence during the trial of the SL9 incident 2 years prior, where the roots of the murders in Rise from the Ashes ultimately lie. Aside from earning him the ire of the police department and prosecutor's office, it also weighs heavily on him, as he never wanted to resort to forging evidence, despite employing other dirty tactics. The path Edgeworth walked that he believed was just was not. Due to the events of these two cases, he starts writing a letter of resignation during Rise from the Ashes, and after the case ends, he disappears from the prosecutor's office, leaving only a single note. Prosecutor Miles Edgeworth chooses death. During the next year, Edgeworth remains missing, but everything also begins to change for him in that time. During the last trial day of Rise from the Ashes, Phoenix confides in Edgeworth that he wants to draw out the truth of the SL9 incident, which was deemed solved by the police. It was also the subject of a cover-up. Edgeworth initially chides Phoenix for this, saying there is no time to reminisce about the past, often the last day of a trial. Phoenix rebuffs this, as Edgeworth will never find out what really happened otherwise. After thinking this over, when the trial starts, Edgeworth decides to change his first witness in order to start drawing out the truth. It is here where Edgeworth starts to find a new reason to stand in court. Near the end of Rise from the Ashes, he starts to see the trial not as a way to determine the guilt of the defendant, but to establish the truth of the events of the SL9 incident and its follow-up murders. During his absence, Edgeworth makes this the cornerstone of his new philosophy. In a new game, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Justice for All, Edgeworth returns to the United States and prosecutes a case that is important to Phoenix Wright personally in Farewell My Turnabout. And in that case, he relays his philosophy to Phoenix. He sees the function of prosecutors to make the truth known, to raise any paradoxes and contradictions that may exist and fight with everything they have. To work together with defense attorneys to reach the truth, not stand against them, as he did with Phoenix in Turnabout Samurai and Rise from the Ashes. That's why he now stands in court. Prosecutors are but one side of this coin, as defense attorneys also have their reasons to stand in court. Phoenix Wright, the main protagonist of the series, found his reason fairly early on in life. In 3rd grade, he was accused of stealing another student's envelope containing $38. This was supposed to pay for that student's lunch for that month, and Phoenix had skipped gym class that day due to having a cold, so he had no alibi. A class trial was held in which Phoenix was the defendant and everyone was convinced he had done it, while he had not. In that moment, Phoenix learned what it felt to be truly alone. That is until Miles Edgeworth leapt to his defense and demanded evidence, as otherwise Phoenix could not be found guilty. In the end, the teacher declared the class trial over, and afterwards, Phoenix learned about defense attorneys from Edgeworth. Edgeworth had acted as a friend to the friendless in this instant, following his father's philosophy. Years later, while in university, Phoenix read an article about Prosecutor Edgeworth and the dirty tactics he supposedly employed in a newspaper article. He tried to write to Edgeworth but never got replies, so he became a defense attorney. That way, Edgeworth would have to meet him in court, whether he liked it or not. Phoenix thus became a defense attorney because he believes he is the only one who can help Edgeworth. Defense attorneys are those who believe in their clients when they have no one else, after all. Phoenix would also see this reinforced during the events of Turnabout Memories, where attorney Mia Fey cleared his name of a false murder charge. In Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, Phoenix does not really see these notions challenged, and mainly has to gain experience. First under the tutelage of Mia, and then later as the head of his own law office when she is murdered. In every case of the first game, aside from the first one, he presents very incriminating evidence to a true culprit and gets framed for murder, almost roughed up by the mob, and tasered for his efforts. Later games, he does not do this anymore and is generally a bit more on top of the cases in which he acts as the defense. During the events of Justice for All, Phoenix has grown bitter at prosecutors. After Edgeworth left his note, Phoenix thought that he had betrayed his own words from when he was a child, and decided that the Edgeworth he had known had died. Due to this, he thinks all prosecutors only care about winning. He sees it as reprehensible that prosecutors and defense lawyers would use the courtroom as personal battlefields for their own ego-driven goals. He has seen plenty of that at this point. Be it prosecutors pursuing perfect records like Edgeworth and Manfred von Karma, or Manfred's daughter, Franziska, trying to defeat Phoenix to prove she is better than Edgeworth to fulfill the expectations the von Karma names brings with it. The worst example is probably Manfred in Turnabout Goodbyes, as he tried to have Edgeworth framed for a murder he himself orchestrated. All to take revenge on Gregory Edgeworth, who had exposed faulty evidence Manfred had used and so caused him to receive a single penalty. That is after already killing Gregory in the DL6 incident. As is evident, Phoenix seems to have already figured out why he stands in court during Justice for All. Their major challenge arises for Phoenix during the events of Farewell My Turnabout, the final case of the game. There, his close friend Maya Fey is kidnapped by an assassin who demands only one thing in return: a complete acquittal for Matt Engard, who has been arrested for murder. During the course of the next few days, Engard confesses that he was the one who hired the assassin to carry out the murder. Due to this, Phoenix has a hard decision to make. Does he let Engard walk free and let the innocent Adrian Andrews get convicted for murder instead? Or does he pursue the truth and a fair verdict at the cost of Maya's life? During the trial, Phoenix has to use the same dirty tactics that the prosecutors he had grown to despise used to cast suspicion on Adrian Andrews in order to buy himself time. In the end, Edgeworth, Franziska von Karma and Detective Dick Gumshoe help him to find a third option that ensures Maya's safety and a guilty verdict for Guard. This allows Phoenix to learn that there is more to being a defense lawyer than just getting a not guilty verdict. However, there was still one desperate moment in which Phoenix had to decide what verdict he would pursue before the third option presented itself. What he chooses in that moment is what being a lawyer means to him, but this choice is not given a definitive resolution in the game. As the player is forced to make it, the third option out of the situation is instead presented. Given events later in the series, however, I believe Phoenix would have chosen to give Guard a guilty verdict. When it comes to the original trilogy of Ace Attorney, Phoenix's development in this regard more or less ends with Farewell My Turnabout. However, the events of the third game, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trials and Tribulations, form a sort of test for Phoenix and his convictions. In the game, he is directly challenged by the mysterious prosecutor Godo, who is actually a former colleague of Mia Fey by the name of Diego Armando. He was in a coma while Mia was murdered in the first game and resents Phoenix for being unable to protect her from her killer. He thinks Phoenix has learned nothing from his former teacher. As such, he seeks to meet Phoenix in court to see the kind of man he is and to defeat him. He loses his first two attempts in the Stolen Turnabout and Recipe for Turnabout. In the game's final case, Bridge to the Turnabout, Godel tries to save Maya from a murder plot concocted by her evil aunt Morgan and arranges several accomplices to do this, but does not contact Phoenix or Maya herself. Things go awry and Godo ends up killing one of his accomplices, but someone else is arrested for it. Due to this, Phoenix and Godo end up facing off in court once more. The final segment of that trial presents a challenge from Godo to Phoenix, to figure out the truth of the case by himself. In earlier games, it is true that Phoenix often receives help from Maya and Mia through the power of spirit channeling in Lana Sky and Rise from the Ashes. There have also been times where he did bring a case to a close by himself, including once prosecuted by Godo. Recipe for Turnabout, for example, he baits the true culprit, Furio Tigre, into confessing that he knows what the bottle containing poison used to murder the victim looks like by claiming a different bottle is the bottle with the poison. He did not get help from Maya or Mia in this instant. So Phoenix does also rise to the challenge in Bridge to a Turnabout and proves Godo himself is the murderer. In that instant, Godo realizes that Mia lives all through Phoenix, and he has become every bit the lawyer she was. The person Godo truly hated for not being able to save Mia was himself, and that he had been the arrogant one all along. Godo had been lying to himself about Phoenix all along, making him realize this is how Phoenix saves Godo from himself. Mia also acknowledges this explicitly, saying that he was as good out there as any defense attorney could hope to be, that he cannot learn anything from her anymore. The test was less about his abilities as a lawyer and more about his convictions in that he could see the case through to the bitter end to expose the truth, regardless of whether or not that would lead him to the imprisonment of the man who had risked his life to save Maya. It is also here where Phoenix formulates his own answers to what it means to defend someone in court. It is the constant grappling with the questions of who you should fight for and how hard you must fight. Phoenix says fighting for others is what makes people human. In the end, Phoenix and Edgeworth reach similar conclusions as to what it means to stand in court. Prosecutors and defense attorneys should work together in court to find the truth, both fighting with everything they have to defend their respective positions until it is found. Prosecutors throw everything they have at the defendant, while defense attorneys have unyielding faith in their clients to defend them until the bitter end. Mutual trust between the prosecutor and the defense attorney is also needed for the truth to come out. Prosecutors and defense attorneys both fight in court by shouting until they get the verdict they seek, drawbacks to both sides. Via their mutual trust, they should balance each other out to find the truth. However, there are cases in which this is not enough. Cases where there is insufficient evidence to find the truth, or where the legal system itself stands in the way. Phoenix and Edgeworth first experienced this in Rise from the Ashes, specifically when dealing with the SL9 incident. That was a case involving a serial killer called Joe Dark, who never left behind enough evidence to be convicted. The detectives and prosecutors of the case felt like the law stood in their way. Due to this, high-profile detectives Lana Sky and Damon Gant forged evidence to get the conviction they desired. They made it seem like Joe Dark had murdered prosecutor Neil Marshall in a scuffle, for which he was convicted and received the death penalty. This was also part of a larger plot on Gant's part. He was the one who actually murdered Neil and made it seem like Lana's sister Emma had killed him, then worked with Lana to cover up Emma's murder, knowing Lana was set to become a chief prosecutor, a high-ranking position within the prosecutor's office. He could use the situation to blackmail Lana into doing whatever he wanted, and he was also set to become chief of police himself. giving him control over both institutions and unchecked authority for any investigation. This all because Gant despises criminals and likely felt as powerless before the law as Lana did. In regards to the legal system as it exists in Ace Attorney, forging evidence is a big deal because the evidence law is as loose as it is. Evidence may be presented at any time during a trial if it is relevant to the case, if it was not given to or discovered by the police beforehand, which depends on such evidence being presented in good faith. Forging evidence violates this trust, underlying the second rule of evidence law. First rule also depends on the authority of the police, and so if someone in the police seeks to gain a conviction, they can forge evidence. In this way, forging evidence undermines the foundations of evidence law itself, erodes trust in it and the institutions meant to uphold it. As such, the revelation that Lana forged evidence causes quite a stir among the courtroom and audience in Rise from the Ashes. The events of Rise from the Ashes itself are the result of Gant murdering a detective who wants to reopen investigations into the SL9 incident. In the end, he is caught due to Phoenix and Edgeworth working together, but Gant does leave Edgeworth with a warning. He may end up in the same place as Gant did if he tries to bring them down alone. In this case, Edgeworth was not alone, but those words would be an omen of what was to come for both men. During the events of Ace Attorney investigations Miles Edgeworth gets dragged into the Yatagarasu case, a noble thief who is known to infiltrate businesses undetected to obtain evidence of their dirty dealings and then send it to the press. The thief does this to oppose an international smuggling ring whose influence runs deep, including in several judicial institutions. For example, the ringleader had it arranged that 2 witnesses who were set to testify against the ring were murdered. Incriminating evidence in those cases was stolen. Gordon Faraday, the prosecutor of those cases, and Tyrell Badd, the lead detective, realized that there was a limit to what the law and the courts could do in this situation. Ringleader is someone who cannot be brought to court and is thus above the law. Turnabout reminiscence. This is exemplified by Manfred von Karma, who argues there is no reason to deal with such individuals. They fall outside of the purview of the court by definition, and so prosecutors have no obligation to do anything about them. Due to this, Faraday and Badd formed the Yatagarasu along with Callisto Yu, defense attorney who was actually a spy for the smuggling ring. They abused their legal positions to obtain evidence from businesses and to cover up evidence of their break-ins to fight the smuggling ring in the mass media, not in court. Faraday also illegally hid evidence away in his case files and Badd stole some, both pieces that could expose the identity of the ringleader to hide them from the ring itself. Turnabout Ablaze, the final case of investigations, Edgeworth works with Interpol to corner Crocus Alba, the ringleader. He is someone who conventionally cannot be brought to court because he is the ambassador of the Kingdom of Alabast to the United States. This means he enjoys extraterritorial rights, can only be tried in Alabastian courts, where he will likely never be found guilty due to his influence in the kingdom. Due to interference from Interpol, Alba is stripped of his position during the case, but problems still remain. To bring him down and find the truth of the case, Edgeworth has to use the illegal evidence obtained by Faraday and Badd, but this poses a dilemma to him. The evidence is illegal, so he feels he cannot use it as a protector of the law. He does no longer follow the Von Karma creed of victory at any cost, but also refuses to follow the path of the Yatagarasu that circumvents the law altogether. Law is in conflict with the truth. In the end, Edgeworth comes to a conclusion that the law is something made by man. If there is a limit there, it was put there by man, and if one goes beyond that, the law too crosses in new territory. Edgeworth thus proceeds into new territory when he presents the illegally obtained evidence and in the end is able to take Alba down. He has found his new creed. Turnabout Trigger, the first case of Ace Attorney Investigations 2, Prosecutor's Gambit, he repeats this approach more or less. When he is about to be taken off the investigation of the attempted assassination of a foreign president, an assassin holds one of the president's bodyguards hostage to allow Edgeworth to continue the investigation. This violates extraterritoriality, but does provide an opening for Edgeworth to find the truth once again. He also performs an unsanctioned questioning of the president. This inevitably causes him to find himself in conflict with those meant to regulate the professional conduct of prosecutors, however. During the captive turnabout, Edgeworth is taken off the prosecution of the presidential assassination case by Verity Gavel, a judge and member of the Committee for Prosecutorial Excellence. She chastises Edgeworth for his conduct and newfound philosophy, with her seeing Edgeworth's willingness to take risks in the face of the law as a fancy way of saying that the end justifies the means. Rules are not meant to be bent and the law is absolute. To circumvent the committee, Edgeworth starts working with Eddie Fender, former assistant to his father and current head of Gregory's former law office. During the next few cases, Edgeworth learns to walk in the shoes of a defense attorney as he works with Fender and also solves his father's final case, the one that led to the DL6 incident. While he had acted as a defense attorney for a day during Bridge to the Turnabout in Phoenix's place, he did so at an incapacitated Phoenix request and thus placed his trust in Phoenix, not necessarily directly in his client, Iris herself. In the captive turnabout, Edgeworth learns to build a bond of trust with his client as a defense attorney and to place that bond above the search for the truth. Edgeworth starts taking ever more drastic measures to evade the committee in his quests for the truth, acting as a private citizen in his investigation in Turnabout Legacy, which earns him an official hearing. He also even gives up his prosecutor's badge when his close friend Kay Faraday is suspected of committing a murder in the room of the committee in A Turnabout Forsaken, because he wholeheartedly believes in her innocence. When he helps Kay evade capture from the police later and continues investigations illegally, he is imprisoned himself. In that case, Edgeworth is dealing with another figure who is effectively above the law, committee chairman and former chief prosecutor Excelsius Winner. He is the true murderer in A Turnabout Forsaken and an exceedingly powerful figure in the legal world given his titles. He sells and destroys evidence and is able to create his own truths. Was also the one who gave Manfred von Karma his one penalty, leading directly to the DL6 incident, likely only because von Karma was growing to be an influential figure within the prosecutor's office himself. This to the point that most prosecutors keep their badges in their pockets because von Karma deemed it more fashionable. In the end, Edgeworth is able to bring down Winner during his official committee hearing as he did Alba. He does this with the aid of Cavell, who was always seeking to work against Winner and his corruption, but only he really started to understand Edgeworth after having a heart-to-heart with him in the detention center following his imprisonment. During the next case, Turnabout for the Ages, Edgeworth is also able to impart the lessons he has learned in previous games to Cavell. In that case, her adoptive son is kidnapped during the trial of the culprit of the captive turnabout. When Edgeworth tries to learn about this, she puts up an emotional wall because she believes her feelings are immaterial and she should always remain impartial as a judge and servant of the law. Edgeworth convinces her instead that those who stand in court are all humans with feelings who cannot remain impartial at all times. Servants of the law are not superhuman or heroes. All they can do is fight the best for what they think is right. This allows her to open up and accept Edgeworth's help in finding her missing son. After all that, Edgeworth is not ready to take his prosecutor's badge back yet, as he is struggling to decide if he wants to walk the prosecutor's path or the defense attorney's path. He is able to make up his mind after confronting Simeon Saint in Turnabout for the Ages. He is the man that Edgeworth defended in the captive turnabout, and it is revealed that through small acts, he manipulated the culprits of 3 previous cases in the game into committing their murders. Saint did this out of revenge, as he was hounded his entire life by powerful people for witnessing incidents that were part of their conspiracies. As his enemies, one of whom was Winner, had high-ranking positions in the legal system, he could not do anything against them and lost faith in that very system. Edgeworth proves that Saint also committed a murder himself, but his predicament does ultimately lead him to decide which path he wants to walk. To help people as a defense attorney or fight crime as a prosecutor, Edgeworth chooses neither, as he wants to help people as a prosecutor. Defense attorney would not have been able to help Saint with this situation. Saint had been able to rely on the law, he would not have had to take matters into his own hands. So Edgeworth keeps walking the prosecutor's path, while Cavell remarks that the law can be both used to help and to hurt people, which is one of its loopholes or contradictions. One cannot solve such contradictions without engaging with the law, which is why Edgeworth dedicates himself to fighting them as a prosecutor. The law is filled with loopholes and contradictions. One was already discussed, and another one comes up during Turnabout Legacy, pertaining to an 18-year-old murder that leads into the DL6 incident. It was committed by Carmelo Gusto, but he was never arrested due to fleeing abroad, and the innocent Samson Tangaroa was arrested under suspicion of being the culprit instead. In the end, Tangaroa was convicted as an accomplice instead, and Gusto only comes into view as a suspect 18 years and 4 months after the murder. Statute of limitations for murder is 15 years in Ace Attorney's America. That time is put on hold if a suspect is in a foreign country. Gusto was abroad for 3 years, coming 4 months short of the statute of limitations. The statute is also put on hold while accomplices are put on trial, so if Tangaroa's year-long trial is taken into account, it is possible for Gusto to be tried in court. False conviction ultimately allows for the truth about Gusto to be officially recognized. And where there are contradictions such as these, the law should be changed, just like humans do. Only a short while after Edgeworth defines what the law and the contradictions in it mean for him and his path, Phoenix has to contend with these contradictions as well. Things end up worse for him. He takes the case of a famous magician known as Zach Grammarier, after he had rejected his previous defense attorney Christoph Gavin. On the outside, Christoph seems like another example of an attorney who fights for the truth and preaches belief in his clients. He says as such to his protege Apollo Justice in Turnabout Trump. However, in truth, Christoph is a slippery man who embodies everything that the Ace Attorney series defines as a bad attorney. He sees the law as absolute. As he says at the end of Turnabout Succession, there's only room for him and the law in the courtroom. Practically, that means he's always searching for contradictions in the law to further his own ends. Zack determined the character of both him and Phoenix by playing poker games against them, observing their behavior, deciding that Christoph was not a good fit as he sensed the darkness lurking within him. In response to this, Christoph manipulates a piece of forged evidence into the hands of Phoenix Wright. He also informs his brother Clavier, the prosecutor for the case, of this fact and brings him in contact with the forger Drew Misham. During the trial, when Phoenix inevitably presents the evidence in question, this allows Clavier to prove that Phoenix had supposedly forged it by calling Misham to the witness stand. This leads to the Bar Association taking Phoenix's badge. As Phoenix had always been able to miraculously turn hopeless cases around, getting caught red-handed at cheating cast doubt on all his prior wins. Christoph, the dishonest one in this scenario, managed to turn the rules of the system that say that forged evidence is not allowed against the honest Phoenix. He abused the loophole, so to speak, for his own petty motives. One might also wonder why Christoph had that forged evidence in the first place. He would have used it to force a win, as the evidence in question was rather decisive. This shows the lengths Christoph is willing to go to, as the case was to be Clavier's first outing in court. Christoph thus does not shy away from using forged evidence, even in such a situation. At the same time, he also prepared 2 items and gave them to Drew Misham and his daughter Vera, who did the actual forging work. First was a stamp of Troep Grammarier, which Vera was a huge fan of and laced with poison. Second was a poisoned bottle of nail polish, as Christoph had noticed that Vera had a tendency to bite her nails when stressed. He gave it to her as a good luck charm to use when she would go outside of her house, which stressed her. All of this to eliminate both Mishams as witnesses. The question remains as to what drives Christoph, given he is willing to go to such lengths just to win a trial. Turnabout Trump, he is responsible for the murder of Shady Smith, who was in actuality Zack. When asked by Phoenix why he murdered Shady Smith, Christoph does not answer. Instead, black psyche-locks appear. Regular red psyche-locks represent secrets a person hides consciously and can be broken via questioning. However, black psyche-locks are a different beast entirely. Described as cold and full of despair, dual destinies, it is explained that they represent a secret from the deepest place of a person's heart, that they aren't even consciously aware of. The question thus becomes what secret lies in Christoph's heart that drives him to commit the atrocities he does. The most revealing passage on this matter perhaps comes from the end of Turnabout Succession. At the time he took Zack's case, the magician troupe he was a part of was very popular. Christoph would likely have enjoyed much fame if he successfully defended Zack. All that was robbed from him over what he perceived as simply losing a poker game, as Phoenix did manage to defeat Zack in poker. Phoenix meanwhile would remain disbarred for the next 7 years, but continues investigating Zack's case, or who was behind the forgery. Zack ran away at the end of his trial, and so a verdict was never declared. Phoenix still feels responsible for his client afterwards, not giving up the attorney spirit. As he says to Drew Misham during his investigation, "If you want to apologize, try my client." By the time of Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, remarkable change has occurred in Phoenix's demeanor. He's much craftier than he was as a lawyer during certain cases, as can be seen in Turnabout Trump. In that case, he is framed for the murder of Shady Smith. During the previous 7 years, Phoenix kept Christoph close as a friend, and asks his associate Apollo Justice via the phone to be his lawyer when he discovers Smith's body. This turns into a trap, as Phoenix quickly figures out that Christoph is behind the murder due to a slip of Christoph's tongue during the phone call. To reveal this, he needs to force Christoph into court and someone who will tolerate no injustice, an attorney like Apollo. During the subsequent trial, Phoenix at first keeps silent, but as more details are revealed through the testimony of the only other witness, he takes the center stage, carefully guides the trial in a specific direction by choosing to reveal crucial information at specific times. Due to this and another slip of the tongue on Christoph's part, it is proven he was at the scene of the crime. He's forced to testify on the witness stand. Phoenix subsequently guides Apollo in making deductions to prove Christoph committed the crime. However, decisive evidence does not exist, which is where Phoenix's literal trump card comes in. Phoenix has prepared an ace of spades with a splotch of blood on it, which he gives to Apollo via his adopted daughter Trucy. This card proves that when he was killed, Shady Smith was sitting backwards in his swiveling chair compared to when his body was found. That in turn opens the door for the scenario that Christoph used a secret passage at the scene of the crime to commit the murder, ultimately leading to his confession. Except, as Phoenix reveals at the end of the case, the card was forged. A real bloody ace did exist, but it would have been taken by Christoph after he committed the murder. To catch Christoph, Phoenix needed to fabricate the evidence, and he knew Christoph could not call it out as fake, as that would expose him as the killer. This seems to go against everything Phoenix would have stood for as an attorney, so why did he do it? Phoenix justifies himself to Apollo by alluding that he is not an attorney anymore, that he is known as a forger anyways. He has nothing left to lose in essence, but the reasons as to why he did it are more complex than that. Phoenix employed a similar tactic and recipe for Turnabout when he was a lawyer to catch Julio Tigre as described previously in this video, by baiting him into confessing into knowing something only the killer would have known. Then it was a spur of the moment plan, but in Turnabout Trump, the situation is far more calculated and engineered. Phoenix knows that Christoph is a very slippery man who will go to great lengths to conceal his crimes and cannot be baited into slipping up like Tigre. As such, it is likely he spent the last 7 years keeping Christoph close as a friend to get to know him and to wait for an opportunity to catch him in another crime. Phoenix was forced to get very crafty in dealing with Christoph and keeps his cards close to his chest, which he normally does anyways as seen through the original trilogy, with him not telling Maya about things like the class trial, Edgeworth's disappearance for months on end. Phoenix also realizes the limits of the law. He was caught in one of its loopholes and cannot use the law as it exists to catch Christoph, a man well versed in those loopholes. Phoenix could not choose to continue to walk the path of a lawyer and had to operate outside the law. This harkens back to Damon Gant and Lana Skye, who similarly felt they had to forge evidence to catch a crafty killer. This brings to mind Gant's warning to Edgeworth. This warning is one of the reasons why Edgeworth was so upset at the end of Rise from the Ashes and chose to leave the prosecutor's office. He concludes that one needs a weapon to fight crime, which Lana rebuffs by reminding Edgeworth that he was not alone. He had Phoenix to aid him, as is the purpose of defense lawyers and prosecutors, to trust in each other to find the truth. And during Prosecutor's Gambit, Edgeworth admits that Phoenix helped him to see that the people around him help him to be a good prosecutor. But Phoenix did go at it alone for those 7 years, observing Christoph just as Christoph kept tabs on those involved with the case. He chose not to accept help from people like Edgeworth in his fight against Christoph, and so he needed his own weapon, a single piece of forged evidence, just like Lana and Gant needed one, used by someone who operates outside the legal system in this case, another loophole. But Turnabout Trump is not the end of this story, as Phoenix also seeks to change the law from within. Despite his reputation, he has still some connections in the legal world. For example, in Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, it's mentioned that he traveled to Europe a few times to study legal systems there to help an old friend with legal work. It's likely being Edgeworth who studied foreign legal systems abroad himself during trials and tribulations. In Turnabout Succession, it is also revealed that Phoenix is the chair of the Jurist System Simulated Court Committee. This is a committee in charge of changing the legal system by running a test for the new jurist system, where jurors are introduced into trials. The idea is they deliberate with the judge on verdicts, not using evidence but their common sense as normal citizens. As chair, Phoenix is in charge of every aspect of the test case, including which case is chosen, and so of course he chooses another case where Christoph is involved. Phoenix likely used his remaining connections in the legal world to be chosen as chair for the committee, but went at it alone as far as his plot is concerned. The test trial is the culmination of that plot, where he demonstrates why changing the law is necessary as he and Christoph come to a head. Turnabout Succession, one of Christoph's poison traps for the Misham springs, and Drew dies due to it. During the case, Phoenix lays out all investigative work he has done over the past 7 years to the jurors, and Christoph is summoned from jail to testify thanks to Apollo. However, it cannot be definitively proven that Christoph was responsible, that Vera is innocent of her father's murder. Christoph defends himself with the adage, evidence is everything, meaning he knows he will always be untouchable because he's good at leaving behind none. That is where the jurors come in, as their common sense is not restricted by the law. When Christoph learns of this and that his schemes have failed, he breaks down in spectacular fashion, and later, when a not guilty verdict is handed down, it is said that he just laughed in response. Dual destinies, it is said that when black psyche locks are forcefully removed, it can end up greatly damaging a person. What happened to Christoph seems consistent with the description of what happens to someone when these locks are broken. What is interesting is what specifically prompts the breakdown, when Christoph learns that Phoenix is responsible for the justice system being implemented. Not at the presence of the system itself per se, though he despises it as well. Earlier in the case, Christoph basically says that he sees Phoenix as far beneath him. He is someone who relies on luck and bluffs in Christoph's eyes, calling him a second-rate attorney and a pitiful excuse for a man. Christoph sees his own skill as superior and does not believe in his client or the truth, somewhat like Robert Hammond. At the same time, Zack chose Phoenix over Christoph, a fact he could fundamentally not accept. As in his own words, Zack deserved to die for that error. Phoenix in the end is the better attorney than Christoph, which is what the latter cannot accept, likely the ultimate source of his psyche logs. When he rants against the justice system, he's rebuffed by the other judiciaries in the room. His own brawler points out that he was always looking for loopholes and that the law is filled with contradictions. The judge remarks that the law is always changing and evolving to be passed on to the future. The justice system is one of those possible changes, aimed at filling one of those contradictions and negating the need for forged evidence to bring the truth to light. The justice system is not seen again in future games, perhaps due to it being deemed too experimental or because it has yet to be implemented, but it does provide a possible way forward in dealing with the contradictions of the law. When Christoph realizes Phoenix has beaten him and his view of the law crumbles, he's confronted with these truths, and his black psyche locks along with his psyche break. Phoenix and Christoph may have employed similar methods, but in the end it is Phoenix's ends and way of lawyering that prove superior. The case that led to Phoenix losing his badge had more far-reaching consequences than only causing him to be disbarred and Christoph to walk free for 7 years. That case, and a case that occurred a year later, wherein Prosecutor Simon Blackwell was convicted for murdering his mentor, who worked at the space station, ushered in the so-called Dark Age of the Law. The mass media launched an all-out attack on the courts afterwards, and people lost faith in the system, not unlike Simeon Saint had in Prosecutor's Gambit. On the face of it, the other case, the UR1 incident, had few obvious implications that would cause it to damage the trust of the people as much as Phoenix supposedly forging evidence would have. Prosecutors have been found guilty for murdering the series before, even more high-profile ones than Blackwell, like Manfred von Karma and Excelsius Wind. Simon's case was likely a straw that broke the camel's back, but the surrounding context of the UR1 incident also explains why the media latched onto the case. On the day after the incident, the space station where it occurred was the site of a rocket launch that was subject to many malfunctions on its way back to Earth. The pilot managed to bring the rocket back regardless, which became known as the famous Hat 1 miracle, was even adapted into a movie, so the eyes of the press would have been all over the associated murder as well. In Dual Destinies, the stories of Phoenix and Edgeworth converge once more, as well as those of a new generation of lawyers who work under Phoenix at the Write Anything agency, Apollo and also Athena Sykes. The journey of this next generation starts to take center stage in Dual Destinies and Phoenix Wright's Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice. They learn what standing in court means for themselves in the dark age of the law and its aftermath. In Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, Apollo starts out as a star-crossed rookie who idolizes Phoenix. Phoenix uses Apollo as a pawn to further his schemes against Crystal for most of the game, keeping him out of the loop on many things. Same time, Phoenix also shows Apollo the limits of the evidence is everything standard. He does this through the forged evidence he produces in Turnabout Trump and the jurist system in Turnabout Succession. And also by telling Apollo that he needs to have an accomplice of the killer's smuggling operation in Turnabout Serenade confess because there is not enough evidence to convict the killer. When the accomplice is about to do so, the killer confesses to his crime instead. At the end of the game, as the judge and Clavier Gavin hold their speeches about what the law means to them, Apollo sees that he still has a lot to learn himself. Phoenix's schemes do not end in Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, however, which is where Edgeworth re-enters the picture. He seeks to bring an end to the dark age of the law by revealing the truth of the UR1 incident. He uses the power he has gained in his new position as chief prosecutor to do so, seeking to help people with it and restore their faith in the justice system. Concretely, he helps Phoenix to get his badge back behind the scenes and allows Simon Blackwell to stand in court again. This is an attempt to bait the real killer in the UR1 incident, extremely secretive spy only called the Phantom, into making a move at Simon because he has evidence pertaining to the Phantom's existence and identity. Phoenix returns more to his disposition in the original trilogy, now free of the burdens that the forging case brought with it and having regained his badge. He is also supposed to keep an eye out on Blackwell and eventually clear his name, at least before his execution date. Edgeworth cannot give Phoenix all the details of the case due to the espionage aspect of the case, making it the subject of a government cover-up as well. Despite that, Edgeworth was likely the one to introduce Phoenix to Athena Sykes during one of their trips to Europe, as Athena is the daughter of the victim of UR1 and was involved herself with the case as well. Athena is not made aware of these schemes, but UR1 is ultimately the reason she stands in court. She seeks to save Simon from his false conviction. At the time of the incident, she tried to testify as a witness in Simon's court case, but was not heard and was traumatized. As a result, she is terrified of courts, wanting to run out of them at a moment's notice. Over the course of Dual Destinies, Athena slowly learns the ropes of standing in court by working alongside Apollo and Phoenix, first as a co-counsel on the Monsters Turnabout and Turnabout Reclaimed, and as the lead attorney in Turnabout Academy. In that case, in Turnabout Countdown, Athena's fear of the courtroom shows, as in especially dire circumstances, she becomes unresponsive and unable to speak. Despite that, she does continue to stand in court and perseveres. First case, where she is the lead attorney, she is confronted with corrupt philosophies that Phoenix and Edgeworth only faced a bit later in their careers, which Apollo saw firsthand in his first case as well. The case in Turnabout Academy revolves around a student at a high school for people seeking to enter the legal field being suspected of murdering one of her professors. The real killer is a professor and defense attorney by the name of Aristotle Means, who believes in the motto of the end justify the means. He imparts this motto onto his students, helping to perpetuate the dark age of the law. He also accepts bribes from parents in exchange for the grades of their children, including Hugh O'Connor and likely also Eustace Winner, which would mean he had been doing so for almost a decade at least. Means is quick to blame his philosophy on the times and that it is necessary to win in court as a defense attorney in the dark age of the law. However, as a teacher, he is also one of the main factors that helps to perpetuate those dark times, so it is just a convenient excuse. His corruption and motto Means is no different from prosecutors like Manfred von Karma and Excelsius Winner, who rely on murder and forged evidence to achieve their ends. It is pointed out in the case that the ends one seeks can be varied. It may even be just like how Phoenix sought to expose the truth in Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, but used dirty tactics to do so. Tina defends her childhood friend Juniper Woods in the case, but finds it difficult to do so due to it being her first proper trial. She is tempted by Means, who tries to impart her philosophy on her. He also chastises her for her inexperience and offers multiple times to take over the defense for her. This likely being just a gambit to push the crime onto Juniper and save his own skin, as he specifically forged evidence that incriminates Juniper. Athena rebuffs him at first, but starts to doubt her own ability after the first trial day, even leading to a sleepless night. When things are at their bleakest during the second trial day, Apollo reminds Athena of an adage passed down to them by Phoenix from Mia, that is also often repeated in the original trilogy. The worst of times are when lawyers have to force their biggest smiles. During the case, Athena learns to take the meaning of these words to heart. They mean to persevere in even the most dire circumstances and to keep a brave face towards one's client, so that they know they can rely on you. Athena initially falters in this a bit, causing Means to almost take over her case, but she perseveres and manages to draw out the truth, believing in herself and her client's innocence. When it comes to Apollo in Dual Destinies, like in Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, he is kept entirely out of the loop. He only learns that Athena is joining the Right Anything agency once Phoenix is already at the airport to pick her up in the Monsters Turnabout, even if Phoenix is not aware of her connection to the UR1 incident at the time. Apollo is also not informed of any of Edgeworth's scheming or the real reason why Simon is allowed to stand in court again despite being a convict, seeing it as just another consequence of the dark age of the law. This comes to a head in the Cosmic Turnabout when Apollo investigates the murder of his close friend Clay Terran, which happened at the same space station where the UR1 incident took place. Apollo has the ability to sense when people are lying due to their nervous tics, and he senses one of Athena's after she claims that she has never seen a murder weapon before. He continues to sense Athena lying whenever the case is discussed afterwards, and so starts wearing an eye patch so she cannot see her nervous tics. But this also plants a seed of doubt in Apollo, because he cannot trust Athena anymore and begins to believe that she murdered Clay as well as her own mother during the UR1 incident. Phoenix instead believes in Athena's innocence, so Apollo takes leave of absence from his legal office to seek a truth that is ultimately different. Everything that has happened caused Apollo to stop trusting those around him. This is representative for the state of the legal system as a whole in Apollo Justice Ace Attorney and Dual Destinies, where people have lost faith in the legal system and its ability to effectively determine who is innocent and guilty. Turnabout for tomorrow, the final case of Dual Destinies, Aura Blackwell, the sister of Simon and an employee at the space station where the UR1 incident took place, even feels forced to take several hostages so that a retrial can be held for UR1. It is during that trial where Apollo squares off against Phoenix as a witness, having lost his faith in his co-worker and questioning if he is fit to be a lawyer at all because of this. In only doubt, Apollo demands evidence from Phoenix that Athena is not the killer, wielding the same words his former mentor Christoph had once done. However, in Apollo's case, this is not a sign of smug sense of superiority, but of desperation. Later in the trial, he begs Phoenix for a way out, to dispel the doubt inside him so that he can trust Athena again, which Phoenix manages to do as the trial continues. Phoenix and Edgeworth, who serves as the prosecutor of the case, reiterate all they had learned over the course of the original trilogy, hoping to restore Apollo's faith. Evidence that casts suspicion on Athena in the first place is proven to be forged, and this allows Apollo to take his place alongside Phoenix and Athena again. Together, the three of them manage to corner the Phantom and expose the entire truth behind the UR1 incident. This in turn dispels a lot of the distrust around the legal system and brings the dark age of the law to a close. There's still work to be done afterwards, however, as Edgeworth initiates a purge of corrupt prosecutors in the prosecutor's office in spirit of justice, but by and large are on the road back to recovery at the end of Dual Destinies. Athena and especially Apollo's journeys continue in spirit of justice. The former heads the defense in Turnabout Storyteller, and while she still needs help to find the truth and has a moment where she stops believing her client, she faces the verbal abuse Prosecutor Nayuta Santmari throws at her head-on without blacking out. She still has a long way to go, but is moving forward and growing in being a defense attorney nonetheless. Athena's journey in the game is one of continued growth. Apollo's is reaching a climax. Magical turnabout, while Phoenix is out of the country, the Right Anything agency faces an existential threat in the form of Roger Ratins. He frames Trucy, Phoenix's adoptive daughter, for murder on live television and also manipulates a contract so that he can repossess all things belonging to the agency. In these dire circumstances, Apollo chooses to defend Trucy to save her and the agency. Phoenix cannot make it back home in time, so he leaves it to Apollo to hold down the fort. Over the phone, he relays to Apollo that he thinks he can do it. He has seen him win many hopeless cases and has helped to guide Athena. Far from the mere pawn he used him as in Apollo just as Ace Attorney, Apollo has proven to have found a firm understanding of how he should stand in court at the end of Dual Destinies. In the end, Apollo is able to make good on his trust and manages to prove Ratins is the killer, preventing the repossession of the Right Anything agency's office in the process. Later, during the final case of the game, Turnabout Revolution, Apollo faces off against Phoenix in a civil trial. Because Maya has been kidnapped, Phoenix is forced to stand against Apollo in court. But Apollo does not know that, and as Phoenix says, he is not holding back. Apollo fights Phoenix to the best of his abilities. When things look dire, his adoptive father, Dirk Samadi, a defense attorney, reminds him of his own motto, a dragon never yields. This means that no matter what, a defense attorney should never give up. With those words in mind, Apollo is able to beat Phoenix in court and save him from his own predicament on top of that. He is able to find a loophole in the kidnapping plan as he figures out the kidnapper needs to use Maya to complete his plot, so cannot afford to harm her. This pulls Phoenix out of his desperation and together they face off against Phoenix's client, the plaintiff Paul Attition Wimperson. For while defending is important to an attorney, it is equally as important to find the truth. At that point, Apollo has more or less becomes Phoenix's equal in ability. In the second half of Turnabout Revolution, he makes good on his vow at the end of Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. To fight the law if that is what he has to do if he wants to change it. The second half of the case, Apollo and the other members of the Right Anything agency travel to the kingdom of Corrine to find Maya. Through a failed hostage exchange, Dirk is arrested for murder of the hostage taker, Corrine's Minister of Justice. Apollo chooses to defend Dirk and so comes in contact with the Defense Culpability Act, an unjust law which states that lawyers who defend criminals will receive the same punishments as those they defend. The prosecutor Apollo faces is Garan Siatar Corrine, the Queen of Corrine. An absolute monarch, she has the ability to rewrite the laws of the kingdom on a whim. She also believes, like Verity Gavel initially and Christoph Gavin, that the law is absolute. As queen, she is the embodiment of that absoluteness in Corrine. Apollo gets to fight the law in a very literal sense during Turnabout Revolution, but he manages to scrape by with Phoenix at his side. All hope seems lost at the end of the case due to Garan's royal guard holding them at gunpoint for accusing her of murder. He combines the mottos of Phoenix and Dirk to prove that no one is truly above the law, not even the queen. He does this by proving Garan has no claim to the throne of Corrine because she cannot channel spirits, which is a requirement to be queen of the kingdom. the end of the trial, Phoenix compliments Apollo's perseverance and says that he has nothing but respect for his abilities as a lawyer. Apollo also decides to stay in Corine as one of its only defense attorneys to rebuild the legal system, working to change it for the better after the repealing of the Defense Culpability Act. This does not mean that Apollo thinks he has nothing left to learn from Phoenix, and he vows to come back to the United States as an even better lawyer when his work in Corine is done. At the end, as he did at the end of Bridgewood Turnabout, Phoenix thinks that people must never stagnate, continue to grow and change. To continuously grapple with questions such as who defense attorneys should defend, how hard they should fight, how the truth can be found, what parts of the laws are just, which parts are not, how the law should be changed, how prosecutors should fight criminals, and how they too can help people. And those who have struggled to find their beliefs and convictions in those matters can impart their wisdom to the next generation. That is the role that Phoenix stepped into in Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, and that Apollo in turn will fulfill the Kingdom of Corine as well, to future lawyers. That is everything I wanted to say here. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye!